Here we go. Let me try actually unmuting. Okay. Alright, hi everybody. I hope the sound's working okay. Let me know if there's any problems. Good to be back. Hope you've all had a good week so far. And yeah, excited to be back with the news.pestphp.com, which will hopefully at some point become the official news site for Pest and allow you to enjoy news and tutorials and everything Pest related all in one location. So we're building it out together on stream, and as we do that, obviously you guys are going to be able to see how you can use Pest in real projects, which is what this series and is all about. Pest in Practice is all about how to use real tests in real Laravel applications. So I hope you enjoy. Since last week, there's a fair bit happened on the project. Basically, I made a decision eventually. Let's go for inertia. Let's go for inertia. I'm not a front end. I'm not a front. I've turned down the quality of my face so that there's nothing wrong with the text. So if that's a problem, I'll turn it back up. Just let me know. But yeah, I'm not a front end professional by any means. I know Vue, but yeah, excuse the styling of what you're about to see. But yeah, basically went ahead, took some Tailwind UI components down and built out a basic sort of framework for the page that we built in the first episode. So you can see we are pulling in the Wink author, we have the Wink post title, a little bit of work here. We have our featured image, just done a tiny bit of Tailwind to output a few fancy things behind the featured image. And then we're using the Tailwind Prose CSS plugin to be able to literally output the content of the blog in a nice way. So how does that work in practice? Well, if you don't know what inertia is basically like this plugin between your server side application and your front end application. So rather than using something like Vue Router or Vue Router, you can instead use inertia, and inertia will handle talking between your server side and your front end, and it saves a lot of work. You don't have to have a REST API. It's just very nice to work with. I've really enjoyed it so far. By no means an inertia pro. I'm sure I'll have lots to learn as we're building this out, but I really wanted to try it because I like where it's coming from. So that's what I'm going to go with for this particular website. You'll see in the preview controller that we were using last week, we have basically the exact same, but the difference is we're now returning, rather than returning view, which is what we were returning last week, we now return this call to inertia. This is the name of the view component that we want to load. So here's the view component in question, the article.view component. And then as a second piece, we load any data that we're interested in using. So here we have our article, and we're going to load obviously the data for that article. I've wrapped it in this article resource, which is basically part of Laravel. It's API resources, and I really like API resources because they have some useful helper methods on them. They also give you a nice place just to tuck away things like data formatting for an API. So the only thing I had to do is create this for inertia method, and the for inertia method is literally just a new method on a custom version of the JSON resource, and it basically turns it into a response and then gets the data as an array. And the reason we do that is because we want to be able to have nested resources. So if I quickly jump into the article resource, you can see, for example, the publish date, I wrap in a date resource, and the author, I wrap in an author resource. So we want that to be available for our inertia data as well. So that's why I created this custom method called for inertia. Now, I haven't actually written tests for this. That is the topic of this evening's stream. The reason I wanted to save writing tests for the stream, other than the fact that this is Pest in Practice, so I probably should, is the fact that this could actually become very repetitive in our tests, and there is a better way to test that I will show you shortly. And it basically requires refactoring our code, but one of the great things about testing is you see places where you can refactor to make things easier. Like, well-tested code is usually code that has good architecture paradigms. Anyhow, let's carry on from where we were. So if I jump into the test that we had last week and I run this, you'll see both tests pass. So we are, as far as tests are concerned, still in a safe place. But what we want to do now is just make sure that our tests promise that the preview controller will return this inertia article. Inertia has great documentation, so if you want to know how to test inertia, go ahead, look at the docs, but I'll show you here as well. We're basically going to open this up and we'll say it returns the article view component. That's a nice way of putting it. Okay, let's open that up. And yeah, we want an author and a post. I may well come up with a nicer way of being able to do that quickly if we have to keep doing it, but for now we'll stick with it. Just turn the music down slightly. Yeah, and you can say assert inertia. Now when you say assert inertia, you're going to say you're going to pass a closure, and you'll see that it passes you a assert class. Okay, so you pass a closure and you receive this assert class, which I'm going to name page, and we can say assert that the page is a component and the component is going to be article. Okay, now let's run this test and you can see it passes. So just to show that this is actually working, if we head back to our preview controller and we change this to something that doesn't exist and run again, you'll see it failed because foo is not equal to article. So it does work, and that's a really nice way of just making sure that the right page is being loaded by your controller. Now, page has some other superpowers as well. So let's drop this down a line and let's come down here. And you'll see we have like this has method, and has allows you to make sure that the correct props are being passed to your article. So here I can say, look, make sure it's got an article, and you'll see that it passes because obviously we are passing an article as a prop to inertia. So it's super useful. You can even pass in a second parameter here, which can either be the value or a scoped closure that basically is a new assertion. And that new assertion is going to be kind of scoped to the particular prop that you're currently discussing. But I don't want to do that. And the reason I don't want to do that is because we're going to make use of resources. And because we're going to make use of resources, we are going to reuse these resources in various places through the application. And I don't want to have to check that we are always outputting the same thing in loads of different test cases. I'd rather just do that check once and then know that it's working. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by injecting into our tests another version of the article resource. The big problem is that resources can't be injected, at least in no easy way, in Laravel. And the fact of the matter is they accept, if I go into the base JSON resource, they accept the resource as the constructor property. So you can imagine that you wouldn't know what to inject if you wanted to do it via dependency injection for your controllers. But there is another way around this, and this is where we come to talking about actions and contracts. So you can think of an action as like a very small piece of functionality that your application does. It's like one of the smallest subsets of possible things that your application performs. And that is a really powerful paradigm because it allows us to be able to switch and swap out various parts of our application incredibly easy. So let me go and show you how easy it is to actually create an action. What we're going to do is in app, I'm going to create a new directory called actions. And in actions, why don't we have one called resources? seeing as this is what we're working with. So just as a reminder, we're working with an article resource. And let's create a new class. And this class is going to provide article resource. That's all it does. And it'll have a single method, and that single method will be handle, right? So we want to handle a article with a request. So let's say wink post article and then a HTTP request and return an array. And all this is going to do is this action here, right? So it's just going to return article resource, make article for inertia request. That's all it has to do. Now here's the problem. With how we've set up PHP stan, we have made this final. Okay, so when we run our PHP stan, it will automatically convert this class to final. And I do actually want to keep it that way. However, that means that we won't be able to mock this class out in our tests. And that will be very important a little later on when we're actually wanting to test how this works. So instead of simply having a class, we're going to do what Laravel actually does in various different packages, such as Jetstream or Breeze. And what we'll do is we'll create a new directory called contracts. And in contracts, let's have a new directory called actions. And then let's have another directory in there called resources. Okay, I hope you're following so far. Let me know if I'm like moving too fast or too slowly. Let's drop in an interface here. And I like to use the plural of the action. So instead of provide article resource, we'll say provides article resource. Okay, this is a interface, and it's just going to have the exact same method inside. Okay, so we have a public function handle, which is given an article, request, returns an array. And we can make PHP stan happy by saying what the array should return. And it's basically going to be string and mixed, right? That's how the data is formatted. Now we can come back to our class and we can implement that resource. So it implements provides article resource. And obviously it automatically has that because we built the method from the class and then turned it into an interface. We now need to tell Laravel that these two things are linked. In other words, when we ask for a provides article resource interface, we want it to give us a provide article resource class. And we can do that in a service provider. However, I'm going to set up a specific service provider for this. So let's say PHP artisan make provider action service provider. Let's have a look. It's like I've just got a syntax error which is causing it to throw a little bit of a fuss. There we go. Let's go to our action service provider. And this is literally just going to have bindings in. So why don't we have public array bindings, and we want to say that the provides article resource class is going to go to provide article resource class. Okay, now if you didn't know, you can use this as shorthand for simple bindings in the Laravel container, but basically this is now going to inform Laravel that whenever we inject this interface, we want to be given this class here. That will allow our action to actually function as an action. We obviously need to go into the config and head down to, let's just close that for a second while we find this. Head down to here and let's bring in the action service provider class. Okay, so that's now set up and we can go ahead and make this work, hopefully. Let's go to our preview controller again, and I'm going to inject that new interface. Inject that new interface in my controller method. So it'll be provides article resource, article resource provider. And then here we can just say article resource provider, handle, pass it the article, pass it the request. Okay, now if all worked well, if we go back to our test, which is here, and we run our 3 tests, they'll all still pass. Okay, so everything is still functioning as it was before, but now we've moved the functionality behind a contract or an action that we are able to switch out in our tests. So let's do that. Instead of testing all of the different pieces of that resource, I'm just going to say, make sure that my test actually uses this provides article resource contract. So how do we do that? Let's say it uses the provides article resource contract. Let's split that up. Provides article resource action, let's say. Okay. And what I want to say is this, and maybe we can get away with a spy here. We'll find out in just a moment, I guess. So let's say spy equals, and we want to spy on that provides article resource class. Okay. So we'll spy on that. Then we're going to perform this same action here, and we'll get the particular root. So we're basically just going to make a request to the root. And then we want to say spy should have received handle once. And that's enough for now. Let's test. Okay, we passed. And this basically means that we have checked that we are actually making use of our contract in this controller. Okay, so you can see this is the case. If I go back and just turn that back into an array, this is now going to fail because we don't actually ever call article resource provider. But once it's in there, we pass, which is really nice. Okay, so now that we have that in place, we can in a separate location test our actual implementation. Our actual implementation being the provide article resource class. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Head back to our terminal and let's say a make test, and I like to put things in the same folder structure. So actions, resources, provide article resource test, and we want a pest test. And there is actually something to say for making this a unit test as well, but I'm going to keep it as featured just for now. Okay, so let's go to the provide article resource test, and let's say it formats an article correctly. And let's see if we can make this work. So we'll say the action is equal to a new, and I guess we could even bind it through the container. So we could even say this app make provide article resource class. And let's say result equals action handle. We want to pass in an article, so why don't we actually create an article so that we can test against that in a moment. Article equals article. Did I call it a post? Yeah, that's annoying, isn't it? Need to go and update that at some point so we have consistent naming. But yeah, I'll create an article and I'll handle by passing in the article, and then because we're in a featured test, I can also just pass the global request object, which is really nice. Okay, and now we can basically say, well, let's first of all just dump and die the result and see where that gets us. Okay, yeah, so we have the information that we were interested in from before. So what we can do in this series of tests is actually check that this matches our expectations. And in order to split this down nicely, we could do one of two things. We could have multiple tests and we could use a before each, or we possibly could make use of data sets here. So yeah, I may go ahead and make use of data sets. The only problem is that the data set would be quite knowledgeable about the posts that have been created. But we could do that. Let's try it. So I'll create a data set using the with method, and data sets are basically a way to loop over or run a test a number of times, and each time you run it, you're going to pass in a different set of data to use in that test. So let's imagine that what we're going to do is pass in an array of, we'll call it state, and this is the state that's going to be passed to our article factory. And then why don't we say we want to check the result. So let's say string key, string value. Okay. So let's say expect string, expect result key to be value. Okay. So obviously if we run this now, it's going to fail because we haven't passed any arguments in, but we can do that now. So we'll pass some state into our article, and the first state is going to be title is hello world. I would expect title then to be hello world, and you can see our first test passes. Okay, let's move on to the next test, and to do this I'm actually going to just dump out the result so that I can see the different things that are available to me. So if we do let's do featured image, and if I did featured image of something like storage, some fake file .png, then I would expect that to be the case here. So featured image, and you can see now both of those are passing. We can do featured image caption as well. Let's do pest in practice, for example, and featured image caption should be pest in practice. Okay, now we have 3 passing tests. You can see our tests build up, and each time we're just testing one specific thing. The real nice thing is it stops this actual test case from growing and growing and growing to the point where you don't actually understand what's going on anymore. We basically split our test into bite-sized pieces without having to rewrite the logic in each test. So let's continue. What else have we got here? We have content, right? So let's say content is, let's do a simple one first. Content is foobar baz. I would expect content to be foobar baz. Okay, here we fail, and I kind of expected it to fail, but let's have a look. Wink post is no, yes, of course, it's because it isn't actually content, it's actually body, I do believe, when we actually store, and then content on a wink post. So let me show you that. If we have a look at the content, you can see it's a dynamic attribute, and it checks a number of things. So for example, it checks if you're using Markdown, and if you're not, it's just going to return the body, which is the case at the moment. But then also if you are using Markdown, it's going to do something a little bit different. So I would actually like to test that as well. So let's see if we can make that happen. Let's say Markdown, I think that's what it was called, right? Yeah, Markdown true, and let me just see what that actually looks like. Failed certain 2 strings are identical. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, okay, so it's put it in a p tag, which is fine. That's what I expect. I bet if I did this, it would be in a h1 tag. So let's actually test if that's the case. Not quite. Expected and actual. All right, there was a new line there. It's fine. We should be able to. Do we have to see if we can just get this to function? There we go. So we've now tested not only the body when the content's standard, but also that if the content is actually Markdown, it'll be rendered correctly. Let's be a bit more specific about that as well and say Markdown false here. Could you not just loop over the past in state and check each key pair value? Then you don't have to duplicate your state data twice. Loop over the past in state and check each. Yes, absolutely, yeah. So the reason I'm doing it this way is just to be a bit more specific and to make sure that we're not having like 10 expects in here. Because the other way we could do this is using like higher order expectations. So we may refactor to that in a moment, but I'm just kind of seeing how this looks first, and then maybe refactor in a moment. But I mean, it's quite nice this, because you literally see exactly like what data you passed in and what we expect to get out, which I do like. I think it splits it up quite nicely. We have the publish date. Okay, so this one's an interesting one. Publish date is already a real column. What if we say now sub a day? Then I would expect publish date to be an array, and that array should be diff is yeah, it should still be 1 day ago, right? 1 day ago, and we need to actually maybe say now. It would have to happen first though. Let me just think about this. Maybe start of day. So then we can say ISO is equal to now sub day, start of day, and I think we just have ISO somewhere. To ISO string. Okay, that didn't quite work. Let's have a look. Of course, yeah. So here I've said that the value will be a string, but that actually isn't always the case. It's silly me. Mixed. Or just value. So if you didn't know, we're targeting 7.4 here. So there are certain PHP things that aren't available to us. Howdy, Sam. Argument 2 key must be a type string array given. Did I give an array? Oh, that's me. My bad. There we go. So that now works. We've covered everything now. We have read time. So read time is quite a basic calculation. It's based on a person being able to read 200 words a minute. So that's basically how I've gone about doing that, which I think is fine, at least for starters. But if we were to say something like foo bar baz, okay, and we take a look at read time. And here's an easy way to do this when you don't want to do, let me just see why that's kicking off. I think that'll stop kicking off in a moment. Here's an easy way to do this when you aren't quite sure what the actual value is. Like, just run your test and then take a look at what went wrong. And it's going to say, yeah, 0.015. And I know that is correct, so I can just go and update my test. And that will nicely set it in stone, so that if anyone changes that in the future, they'll at least know about it and they'll have to go and update it. And then finally we have our author. So let's say, here's an interesting one. We need an author ID. Okay, let's try this then. Author, create, get key. That might be might be room to refactor at this point, or in fact, to be fair, what we could actually do is test the author separately, like all the simple keys there, and then we can just move to a slightly different format for testing the author. So it formats in articles, and let's use double quotes here so that we can correctly format the title here with a nice hyphen. And we'll say formats and articles, basic properties correctly. And then we can say it formats and articles author correctly. Okay, so I can go up here, I can kind of grab this, but I want to say that it's for a particular author. So for author, and let's say author equals author create. So we'll pass that author in there, and I can just create like that. And then let's say expect, and we need to obviously perform our action, which is just this here. So we'll expect result, and we want to grab the author. Okay, and then we can use some higher order expectations here. So let's take a look inside our provide article resource, which is just this. An author resource returns ID, avatar, and name. So let's go back to ID. We can say we expect the ID to be the author ID. We expect the avatar to be, and let's actually pass in an avatar to the author. So we'll say avatar is https pestphp.com/avatars/Luke. Obviously that's not real, but it just gives us something that could be real and that we can make use of. And then the last thing was name. And again, let's actually update our name here. Let's say my name is Luke Downing. So I'd expect that to be Luke Downing. So look, yay, test passed. Okay, so we have 8 tests there. Obviously, we are testing all the properties here, even some of the slightly more complex things, like what happens if it's not a markdown post and it's just in plain text. And we're also testing that the author is included there as well. And what you're seeing here is higher order tests. So if you don't know what higher order tests are, basically if you have an object or an array, you can actually access properties on the object or array using this syntax. And then you can perform any number of assertions on here. So I could also do like to-be string. I mean, that's kind of implied by the fact I've done to-be. But yeah, you can chain assertions on, and then you can move on and check another property and chain assertions on there and check another property. You can do that as much as you want. And you can even do nested stuff. So you can do like, let's not use name. Let's say they had like date of birth, ISO, to be. So it's really powerful. I don't use it overly, like if I'm testing loads and loads of properties, I wouldn't use it. So this is what I was saying about here. Like we're either going to have tons of calls to expect, or we're going to have a giant higher order expectation call that's doing over and over, that's testing over and over again. This is why I've gone for a data set for this. But for something like author, it makes complete sense. It's a really nice way of doing it. So the only other thing I want to do is have a test in here that actually checks that when we resolve this contract, we receive this class. Okay, so I'm going to say it is the bound default in the container. We'll open up a function, and I'm just going to say expect this app make provides, and we'll bring in the contract rather than the concrete. And I'll say to be instance of, and I want provide article resource class. And obviously that does pass because that's what we set up, but that just ensures that it is actually set up correctly and that we did things as we should. Let's go back here. I'm going to run composer test unit, which is just a little composer script that I like to set up in projects. Allows me to quickly run pest in parallel. And you can see we are passing all of our tests I'm going to run composer lint, which is basically just my setup that runs PHP CS fixer. So if I've missed any declare strict types or finals, they're going to automatically be applied. And now I'll run my testing again to make sure that everything to do with switching the actions out didn't break because of final classes. And you can see that works just fine. So if we come back to our preview controller, you can see now that basically everything in here is being pushed away from the boundaries of our application, apart from what actually is intended to be at the boundary, and that is what is the format that we want to return in, and that is inertia in this case. Everything else gets shoved out to the boundary of the application, and we don't have to worry about it. So this is one really powerful way to allow you to avoid duplication in tests. If you haven't used the action paradigm yet in your applications, you so should. It's such a powerful little tool, and when you get used to writing those contracts and then actions and then spying on them in your tests, like, things become so much clearer, and your controllers shrink in size dramatically. You don't have tons of stuff in the controller anymore. You instead have it in a reproducible and easy to move about class that you can do whatever you want with, and at any point in your tests you can change out to do something completely different as and when it's required. Okay, so this preview controller is obviously limited to somebody who is authorized, and you'll see what I mean. If I actually grab this and let's do a new private window, and I come here, it's going to take me to the Wink login, because basically what we're saying is you're not allowed to access the preview controller. However, we obviously want people to be able to read blog posts, so why don't we go ahead and try and allow people to do that? So let's go and generate a new controller. Yes, I don't think we have anything yet. So yeah, let's go to Wink and let's say make, in fact, let me just clear this so that we can see what we're doing. Make controller, and this is going to be, so I think I meant warp. I think I might have said Wink there. Warp. The warp is the terminal that I'm using. So yeah, make controller, and let's say posts controller, or let's say article controller actually. And we want a pest test with that article controller. So let's do that. And let's go to article controller test. And we can say it can display an article for a guest. So here's the happy path. First of all, we want an actual article. And again, I've called it post. We'll probably need to go and actually update that at some point. So we'll just say post equals post create. I do believe that in my Wink post factory or post factory, I already have said that the publish date is in the past and that it is published. So our default is that everything is published, which is great. So let's say this get root articles.show, and I want to pass in the post or the article and assert that it is okay. And further to that, I'm actually going to assert that it's inertia, and I'm going to say give me the page and make sure that the page component is the article component, because now that we've done what we've done, we're easily able to reuse all of those key pieces to very quickly build a controller that does something similar but with slight differences. If I run this, it's going to fail. It's going to say articles.show is not defined. Absolutely fine, I would expect that. Let's go to web and let's make it defined. So root get, let's say blog, and then maybe we have article, and it's referenced by, is it referenced by the slug? I think it might be referenced by the slug. So let's do that, and let's say Yeah, there's a reason I'm streaming it at 720p, and that's because the free version of Restream only allows streaming at 720p, and up to yet I've just been a bit of a cheapskate about upgrading because I didn't know how long the streaming thing was going to continue. Seems it's going to continue, but I think I might actually be looking for like alternatives for streaming anyway. So if anyone knows any great streaming products, then or like streaming platforms, please let me know. But yeah, that's the basic reason. I absolutely agree. I would much prefer it to be in 1080p. Anyway, yeah. So let's say articles.show, which is what this is, and rerun. It's going to receive a 500 because we haven't given an action. So let's say article controller, and clean that up, and show. Okay, and obviously now it's going to say show doesn't exist. Let's jump in there. This is a really nice thing about TDD. It literally tells you exactly what you need to do next. You know, you don't have to think about it. So yeah, we'll add show, and we want it to return a response, an inertia response. So let's add that. It's going to fail again. Return value must be inertia response, but nothing was returned. Absolutely fine. Let's return inertia, render, article, and now we have a passing test. Obviously, this is going to fail. If we try to actually visit this page, it will fail. And we're not actually even rendering the article we're interested in at the moment. So let's just add that in now. So we'll grab the wink post, which is the article. I did definitely call it, yeah, article. And we'll say article equals, we want the request. So request. And finally, we want the provides article resource. Article resource provider. And now we can just say article resource provider handle, pass in the article and the request. Test still passes, which is brilliant news. And we now just need to go back into article controller test. We can say it uses the correct resource provider, and slightly different naming to what I did in the other test, so I'll probably just go and unify those in a second. But yeah, if I do the same thing, I don't even have to assert OK anymore. I can just say this spy, and we want to spy on provides article resource class. And then we actually perform our check. And then we want to say, well, we're going to grab the spy here. So we say spy should have received handle once. And you can see that passes. So we now have two passing tests in here. At this point, I'm actually going to just refactor this paradigm, and I actually tweeted about this a little while back. I use this all the time, or at least like this kind of methodology all the time. So it makes sense for me to actually use something slightly different. And that is that I will say, go into my test case, and let's say protected function expect to use action, and we pass into here an action class, so string action, and in PHP stan you can specify that there has to be a class string, and we can have a string which is the method that we expect to be called, but let's default that to handle because I tend to use handle kind of for everything. And this could return the spy itself, I guess. But let's just try this. So let's say this spy action should receive method at least once. Okay, and I think that should mean, hopefully, that here we can just say this expect to use action provides article resource class. Let's comment these spies out and see if that works. And it does. Brilliant. So we can now remove that. And in the same way that you can basically do like this expect exception, you can now also run expect to use action. Just simplifies it that little bit more, helps to kind of make this paradigm feel first class inside your testing framework, and encourages reuse of them in different areas of your test suite. So I really like how this works. Let's just make sure it is actually working. Yes, it is. Awesome. So we can go back now to our preview controller test, and instead of doing this, we can just say this expect to use action provides article resource class, and we can get rid of that. And we can also just say uses the correct resource provider. Actually, I prefer this one. Uses the provides article resource action. Awesome. Okay, so let's head back here. Let's say composer lint and composer test unit, and we're all passing. That's awesome. Nice job. Okay, we can actually see if this works by grabbing this and coming to, we don't want preview, do we? That's hello world. So it's just blog / hello world. Here we go. And everything kind of looks the same because it's literally using the same template. But here's where we can actually begin to alter things. So it will not display articles that have not been published. Okay, so if we say article equals post, and we'll add a method on there called unpublished. So public function unpublished is going to return self. Return this state, and we can say published false, published date, sorry, is now add day. Okay, and so this is now an unpublished post. And if we do this, I think I want to say assert not found. I think that's probably the best thing. Like, we don't really want people to know why it didn't exist. We just want them to think it doesn't exist yet. Like, we don't want any trade secrets being leaked out when Nuno's working on the change logs for Pest or anything like that, any new major versions. So let's make sure it just shows a 404. They can't even see that it exists. You'll see that it's receiving 200. Obviously, we would expect that. Let's go back into our article controller and the show page. And here we can just do this logic up at the top. So let's say if article published, is there a, let's have a quick look on the Wink post. Okay, so I tell you what, I think it's just literally the is published. Or is it, sorry, let me just double check this. What do we call it? Published. Okay, so if article published, so if that's not the case, then let's say abort with a 404. Now obviously that will make that one pass, but this doesn't actually prove both scenarios. So we'll say that are not set as published. And what we'll also do is we'll say publish date which should be a carbon interface, equals null. And that will allow us to say publish date or now add a day. So now we can pass now sub a day into here. In other words, look, it was published the other day. Like, it is published as far as the date is concerned, but someone has manually set it to not be published. And you see that still passes, so we're all good there. But in this case, we're actually going to say it's not published at all, but this is a good one actually. How would we want that to work? Like, if the publish date is in the future, but the publish itself is set to true, should we show it or should we not? I guess we shouldn't show it. That seems like an edge case that is more like a business decision, but I think I'm right in saying we shouldn't show that. So let's say publish date is going to be now add a day, but obviously by default these things are set published to true, so this is technically published, but it's not. And I want the exact same thing to happen here. So not display articles that have publish date set to a future date, and that's going to fail. So we can go to the article controller and I can say if now I think is future, yeah, so we can say if article publish date is future, abort with a 404. Okay, now those are passing. I'll come back and I'll make sure we can run all of those, and then I'm just going to do a little bit of refactoring while using my keyboard shortcuts, just to keep checking that I'm not breaking anything as I'm performing these refactors. So instead we can change this to abort if, or rather abort unless article published. And is there a default abort code? No. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to use the response from Symfony, so not found, and I just prefer that because I think it's easier to read. We'll import as an alias and we'll just say response codes or response code. Yeah, I think it's the right way to go forward. We can always change it in the future. That's the great thing about writing tests, right? It's super easy to go and alter that and make sure everything still works. And then we want to abort if the article publish date is in the future. And again, we'll do response code, not found. Let's get rid of that and run our tests again. And you can see that that worked just fine. And I kind of like leaving those two things on separate lines because it's very easy then to see, you know, that's one thing and that's another thing. In much the same way as nested if statements are difficult to read, I sometimes find it's difficult to read when you have multiple conditions inside a single Boolean statement. So I much prefer just to keep those on separate lines. It doesn't really add any overhead at all and makes things more readable. Awesome. So this would mean that we can access this blog post because it's published. But if we come back and we say new post, let's write in Markdown, this is not yet available. And let's say foobar. And yeah, so if I click this, I can see it, right? However, if I am a guest, I don't see it. However, that, oh yeah, that's me. Let's go to blog. Cool, 404, not found. That's exactly what we're looking for. Awesome. That is so useful. And I hope you can see in like this short amount of time that because we've moved things into these like actions and contracts, not only is testing easier, and we've not had to write the same big tests over and over again. We've got like two very simple tests at the outer extremities of our application, which is just expect to use action. And what we can then do is we can have this used in two places, and in this location we add these extra little bits of code, but in our preview controller, well, that's just super simple and does the one thing it needs to do. In fact, while I'm here, I'm actually going to change this to inertia render, and the reason I'm doing that is because I think by default the standard inertia method can actually return multiple types, which PHP Stan won't be happy about. All right, let's compose a lint. Let's compose a test unit. All our tests are passing. Let's compose a test, and I think we're actually going to come across a few PHP Stan errors here, which I think I'll just spend the last part of the stream fixing up before we wrap up for the day. Okay, so anything here where we're looking for like wink post published date, basically we're not going to be able to find those things because Wink isn't telling us about them. Now, I've been in touch with Mohammed, and he's happy for me to go PR doc blocks that add these definitions. So rather than forcing PHP Stan to understand now, I'm actually going to do it the other way around. I'm going to create a PR in Wink that adds these things, and then we don't need to do any workarounds with PHP Stan. It will just work. Okay, here's an interesting one. Handle inertia requests. So let's go ahead and open handle inertia requests. And I'm pretty sure that shared data should just return. Let's have a look. Shared data. Yeah, so it's a string and then mixed. It could basically be a multitude of things. So let's say string mixed. Let's go back to PHP Stan. Cannot call method get content on string. We'll take a look at that in just a second. All of those are Wink author names. I'll have a look at 27 in a second as well. Action service provider. Yeah, that's fine. So let's go to our action service provider and tell PHP Stan what to expect. It should actually expect a class string and a class string. Like, that's how the bindings work, so that's what it should look like. And this could probably also be deferred, but I'm not going to do that right now. I'll do that off stream. It's not important at the moment. Okay, let's run composer test again. And let's take a look at this article resource. Line 26. Okay, yeah, so I think again this is being caused because it doesn't understand what content is, which is why all of those errors are happening. But once I've gone in and actually added type hints on Wink itself, all of these should basically disappear and we should be left with a clean PHP Stan. Yeah, static analysis, wink wink. It's all good. So yeah, I think that puts us in a nice position. Obviously PHP Stan is failing, just discussed. I'll sort that off stream, but everything else is working nicely. And we actually have both the admin side of things where they can view any post, and we have the user side of things where they can view published posts, and those two things are working. They're set up with inertia. We have like view at our fingertips, so we'll be able to do some real cool stuff. And I think maybe what we'll take a look at in the next stream is we'll move into looking at tags and how we can maybe assign tags and then go back and add related posts to our resource controller, and how by doing that we can actually provide related posts in both locations with minimal effort and kind of have it just automatically update for us. So I'm looking forward to that stream, which we'll tackle same time next week. Although I say that, I was actually thinking about maybe moving it backwards by half an hour, just so we're not clashing with Steve's stream. I don't want people not to get a chance to watch Steve's stream if they're watching mine, or vice versa. So yeah, but I'll announce that at a later date. Anyway, I'm actually going to call it a day there. I think we've accomplished quite a bit. Super happy. It's great to be kind of working on fresh projects, it always feels nice, doesn't it, to kind of dive into a fresh project and do everything exactly how you want to do it. Again, the source code for all of this is on GitHub, so if you want to contribute, if you have ideas for how the news site should look, feel free to like create a PR or open a discussion or whatever you want to do, because we're building Pest together at the end of the day. So it's really exciting to be able to do that. Thank you so much for joining me this evening, and I hope you have a great week, really do. And yeah, keep pesting, guys. Keep writing tests, and feel free to reach out to me on Twitter as well if you have any questions or suggestions or thoughts. But I want to thank you for your time. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you later. Take care.